The first thing I noticed was not the rain drying on her dress, or the tired little boy sleeping against her shoulder, or the two children sitting beside her with the quiet fear of kids who had learned too early that the world could be cruel. It was her eyes. They looked like someone had spent years telling her she was too broken to be loved, and she had almost started believing them. That afternoon, sunlight came through the dusty windows of my old roadside repair shop, turning every tool on the wall silver and every scar on the wooden table visible. She sat across from me with one hand wrapped around a chipped blue mug and the other around her youngest child, who had fallen asleep with his face pressed into her faded dress. Her son, maybe 9, sat straight as a soldier, pretending not to be scared. Her daughter colored quietly on the corner of an old invoice, but every few seconds, she looked up to make sure her mother was still there. Then the woman lowered her eyes and whispered the words that changed my life forever. "No one wants a widow with 3 kids." I looked at her, at the children, at the sunlight on her tired face, and I said the only truth I knew. They haven't met you. Before this story goes further, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Lifeline Diaries if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the kind of love that finds people when they think they have been forgotten. Her name was Maribel Vale, and before life turned her into a woman who apologized for taking up space, she had been the brightest voice in a small town called Renford. People used to say Maribel could make a room feel warmer just by walking into it. She had married young, loved deeply, and built a simple life with her husband, Soren, who worked at a lumber yard and came home every evening smelling of pine, sawdust, and rain. They were not rich, but their house was full of noise, pancakes on Sundays, tiny shoes by the door, bedtime stories, and the kind of laughter that made neighbors smile from their porches. Then one clear daytime morning, Soren left for work and never came back. A truck accident on the county road took him before lunch. By sunset, Maribel was a widow with 3 children, a mortgage she could not pay, and a silence in her home so heavy it seemed to press against the walls. At first, people helped. They brought casseroles, envelopes with folded bills, old clothes for the kids, and promises that she would never be alone. But grief makes visitors uncomfortable when it lasts longer than their sympathy. Weeks became months. The casseroles stopped. The calls became shorter. Some women crossed the street when they saw her, afraid sadness might be contagious. Some men looked at her with pity. Others looked at her like she was a burden before they even knew her name. Maribel tried everything. She cleaned houses, mended clothes, washed dishes at a diner before sunrise, and still walked her children to school with a smile she stitched together every morning. Her oldest, Tobin, stopped asking for new shoes even when his toes pressed against the front. Her daughter, Sella, learned to cut crayons in half so her little brother could have some too. The youngest, Nico, did not understand death, only that his father's chair stayed empty and his mother sometimes cried while folding laundry. I met them because of an old blue station wagon that gave up outside my shop at 11 in the morning. I was under the hood of a pickup when I heard the cough of an engine, then the scrape of tires, then nothing. When I looked up, she was pushing the car from the driver's side with Tobin steering through the open window. Sella held Nico's hand on the sidewalk, both of them watching their mother struggle like they had seen it too many times. I walked over and told her to stop before she hurt herself. She looked embarrassed before she looked relieved. That was the first thing that made my chest tighten. She was not used to receiving help without shame attached to it. My name is Callum Reed. At 41, I had made peace with a quiet life. I owned the repair shop my father left me, lived above it, and spent most evenings alone with coffee, invoices, and the radio. I had loved once, years earlier, but she had chosen a city life and I had chosen this town. Since then, I had become the man people called when engines failed, pipes burst, or storm doors broke loose in bad weather. Useful, dependable, lonely in a way I rarely admitted. Maribel told me she could pay half now and half after Friday. I looked at the engine and knew the repair would cost more than she had. I also knew from the way Tobin watched my face that he was trying to calculate whether adults were about to disappoint him again. So I told her it was a small fix. It was not. I fixed what I could, replaced what I had to, and kept the bill folded in my drawer instead of handing it to her. She returned the next day with $12, a jar of peach jam, and an apology. I accepted the jam and told her the rest could wait. She looked at me like kindness was a language she had forgotten how to speak. That was how it began. Not with romance. Not with music. Not with some magical moment under stars. It began with oil on my hands, daylight on the concrete floor, and 3 children sitting at my workbench eating crackers while their mother tried not to cry. Over the next few weeks, Maribel came by whenever the car rattled, and sometimes even when it did not. She said the kids liked watching me work. Tobin asked questions about engines and pretended he wanted to be a mechanic. Sella drew pictures of my shop with flowers growing out of the roof. Nico fell asleep anywhere, on chairs, on toolboxes, once even on a folded tarp. I started keeping apple juice in the small fridge. Then crayons. Then a blanket for Nico. I told myself it was only because they needed a safe place during the day. But the truth was, the shop felt less hollow when they were there. Maribel never asked for more than she needed. That made me want to give more than she asked. She had a dignity grief could bend but not break. She still thanked people. She still brushed Sella's hair with care. She still laughed when Nico called a wrench a metal banana. But underneath her small smiles, I could see exhaustion standing behind her like a shadow. One afternoon, I found her sitting at my table after the children had fallen asleep in the corner. The sun was bright outside, but inside the room, her face looked heavy with a storm no one else could see. She told me a man from church had offered to marry her, but only if she sent Tobin to live with relatives because, in his words, boys without fathers became trouble. Another man had said she was pretty but came with too much history. A woman at the grocery store had told her she should not expect happiness again because her life was about sacrifice now. That was when she whispered it. No one wants a widow with 3 kids. And I said, they haven't met you. She looked up at me, and for the first time since I had known her, she did not look away quickly. There was fear in her eyes, but also something else. A tiny, fragile hope. After that day, something changed between us. It was not sudden. It moved slowly, carefully, like someone walking across ice. I began walking them home when the car was in the shop. Maribel began leaving an extra biscuit wrapped in cloth on my counter. Tobin started saving questions for me after school. Sella began drawing 5 people in her pictures instead of 4. Nico called me Cal because he could not say Callum, and the name stuck to me like sunlight. But small towns love stories only when they can control the ending. People began whispering. Some said I was being foolish. Some said Maribel was desperate. Some said a man with no children had no idea what he was stepping into. My older sister, Verna, came to the shop one morning and warned me that compassion could look like love when a man was lonely. I told her maybe love often began as compassion, and maybe that was not a weakness. The hardest moment came at the town summer fair, under clear blue daylight with music playing and children running between stalls. Maribel had taken the kids because Tobin had won free ride tickets at school. I met them there after closing the shop. Nico climbed into my arms without asking. Sella showed me a paper crown she had made. Tobin stood beside me, proud and quiet. For a moment, we looked like a family. Then someone behind us laughed and said, "Careful, Callum. That ready-made family will empty your pockets before Christmas." Maribel heard it. Her face changed instantly. She took Nico from my arms, gathered the children, and said they had to go. I followed her to the edge of the fairgrounds, where the noise faded behind us. She told me I should stop coming around before people ruined my name. She said I deserved a woman without grief, without debt, without children who woke from nightmares. She said love should feel light, not like taking on someone else's storm. I wanted to argue, but I saw that she was not rejecting me. She was protecting me from the pain she believed she carried. So I told her about my father. I told her how he had raised me alone after my mother left. How people had called him unlucky. How he worked 2 jobs and still showed up to every school event smelling of grease and metal. How he once told me that family was not always the people who gave you an easy life, but the people who made your life worth the hard parts. Maribel cried then. Not loudly. Just one tear, then another, as if her heart had been holding them back for years. The children changed me before I realized it. Tobin made me patient. He was a boy trying too hard to become a man because he thought his mother needed one. I taught him how to fix a chain, how to hold a wrench, and how to be 9. Sella made me gentle. She slipped drawings under my door, pictures of houses with big windows and people holding hands. Nico made me brave. He trusted without asking for proof, and that kind of trust can either heal a man or terrify him. Maribel made me honest. With her, I could not pretend I was content with silence anymore. One bright morning in September, the bank posted a notice on her door. She had 30 days before the house would be taken. She tried to hide it from the children, but Tobin saw. By noon, the whole town knew. By evening, Maribel came to my shop with her face pale and her hands shaking. She said she might have to move 2 counties away to live with an aunt who had room in a basement. Tobin would change schools. Sella would lose her friends. Nico would forget the only home he remembered. I listened, then opened the drawer where I had kept the unpaid repair bill. Under it was the deed to the small apartment above my shop and papers for the empty house behind it, the one my father had used for storage before he died. I had been fixing it slowly for years with no real reason. Until then. I told Maribel she could rent it for whatever she could afford. She refused. Pride rose in her like a shield. She said she would not be rescued like a helpless woman in a sad story. I told her I did not see a helpless woman. I saw a mother who had carried 3 children through fire and was still standing. I told her the house needed noise, and my life needed purpose, and maybe accepting help was not weakness when the help came with respect. She moved in 2 weeks later. The first day, sunlight poured through the windows as the children ran from room to room. Sella chose the smallest bedroom because it had a tree outside. Tobin inspected the porch steps and said one board needed replacing. Nico stood in the kitchen and asked if Daddy could find them there. Maribel froze. I knelt beside him and said that people we love always know where to find us, even when we cannot see them. That night, Maribel stood on the porch while the children slept inside. She thanked me, but her voice trembled with something bigger than gratitude. She said she was afraid to be happy because every time life gave her something good, it took something else away. I told her I was afraid too. That surprised her. Maybe she thought men like me did not admit fear. But I was terrified. Not of her children. Not of responsibility. I was afraid of loving them and losing them. Afraid of becoming necessary. Afraid of waking one day to silence again after learning the sound of little feet above my floor. She reached for my hand first. We did not rush. Love, real love, does not need to kick the door open. Sometimes it sits quietly on the porch until both people are ready to let it in. Months passed. The house behind the shop came alive. Laundry waved on the line. Bicycles leaned against the fence. The kitchen smelled of soup, crayons, and warm bread. Tobin laughed more. Sella sang while drawing. Nico stopped asking when his father was coming home and started asking when Cal would come for dinner. Then came the day of the school family picnic. Maribel almost did not go. She said it would be full of complete families, fathers tossing balls, mothers laughing under tents, grandparents taking pictures. I told her complete did not mean perfect. It meant present. We went together in the afternoon. Tobin ran in a sack race. Sella won second place in a drawing contest. Nico spilled lemonade down my shirt and laughed so hard everyone around us laughed too. For once, Maribel did not stand at the edge like a guest in her own life. She sat beside me under a white canopy, sunlight on her face, and looked peaceful. Near the end, Tobin's teacher asked families to gather for photos. I stepped back, not wanting to assume. But Tobin grabbed my sleeve and pulled me in. Sella took my hand. Nico climbed onto my lap. Maribel looked at me with tears in her eyes, and this time, she was not ashamed of them. The photograph showed 5 people smiling in different ways. Tobin proud. Sella shy. Nico wild and happy. Maribel soft and amazed. Me, looking like a man who had finally arrived somewhere he did not know he had been traveling toward his whole life. A week later, I found Maribel in the kitchen at midday, sunlight falling across the same blue mug she had held the day she said no one wanted her. She was reading a letter from the bank confirming her old house had been sold. The last piece of her past had closed. She looked sad, but not destroyed. I sat beside her. She said she still felt guilty sometimes for loving life after Soren. She wondered if moving forward meant leaving him behind. I told her love was not a room with space for only one memory. It was a house that could grow. Soren would always be the father of her children. Nothing could erase that. But the living still needed warmth. The children still needed laughter. And she still deserved to be held without feeling like she had betrayed her grief. That afternoon, I asked her to marry me. Not with a ring hidden in cake or music playing in the background. I asked her while Nico napped in the next room, while Sella colored at the table, while Tobin fixed the loose porch board outside with more confidence than skill. I asked her in the middle of real life, because that was where I loved her most. She covered her mouth and cried. Then she laughed through the tears and said, "Are you sure?" I looked toward the children, then back at her. I have never been more sure of anything. Near the wedding day, people who had once whispered began showing up with flowers, pies, and apologies wrapped in awkward smiles. Maribel accepted what she wanted and ignored what she did not. She no longer moved like a woman begging the world to approve of her. She moved like someone who had remembered her own worth. We married on a clear daytime morning in the yard behind the shop. No grand hall. No expensive decorations. Just white chairs, wildflowers, children running in polished shoes, and sunlight bright enough to make everything feel new. Tobin stood beside me with the rings in his pocket, checking them every 10 seconds. Sella walked ahead of her mother dropping petals from a basket. Nico refused to sit down and insisted on holding Maribel's dress. When Maribel walked toward me, she was not the broken widow people had tried to name her. She was a mother, a survivor, a woman with love in her eyes and sunlight on her face. She carried her past with her, but it no longer carried her. Before the ending, please comment "They haven't met you" if you believe every single mother, widow, and broken-hearted person still deserves love, respect, and a beautiful second chance. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Lifeline Diaries so more stories like this can reach people who feel forgotten. Years later, people in Renford still talk about Maribel Vale and the mechanic who married her. But they tell it differently now. They say I saved her, but that is not true. Maribel was never waiting to be saved. She was waiting to be seen. Her children did not make her less worthy of love. They made her love deeper, stronger, and more honest than anything I had known before. And every time I see that old blue mug on our kitchen shelf, I remember the woman who once sat across from me in daylight and whispered that no one wanted a widow with 3 kids. I remember looking at her, seeing everything the world had missed, and answering from the deepest part of my heart. They haven't met you.